So in our Chazorah, we're up to the third paragraph of Ois base, the final paragraph. The whole theme of the Maamar is Avodas HaBerurim. And the Tainug that this elicits, and this is the Tachlis HaKavanah. That's the theme of the Maamar. That's, of course, what the Rabbi resisted. But that's not what the Maamar speaks of. It's not the explaining why they resisted, but rather what the Avodah is, and it's all conveyed in the three meanings of the word for Yasur, as it turns out at the end. The three components of the Avodah. So it concludes the whole beer that happens. Avodas HaBerurim, the parallel within the person, the way they're eating the food, the Aliyah on Shabbos, how this happens in Avodas HaTfilah. The beer of the elevation happens in Daven, Nefesh Adamis, Nefesh Elikiyos, all conveyed in the pasuk. Achalti Yari Devashi, from Shir HaShirim. And it concludes at the end of his bays that through the bitter and the aliyah, so this is mamshech the tainig v'lamayla, and that is a higher tainig than even the tainig of the Gemara Yisavos, of the completion of creation. At the completion of creation, the pasuk says, "V'yarav kimis kol asher asa v'nei tov me'od." Tov me'od obviously is tainig. However, the tainig of the avodah of a yid is greater still. So then came maybe of the heart of the Maamar to explain the order of Tainig and Etzim of Tainig. Right, so let's look at Ois Gimel. So Ois Gimel explains how Tainig affects an expansion of all of the koiches. It's the Ein Seichel, a person should always learn in a place where he wants to learn. Then his whole learning will be at a different level. Likewise, the Midas. And an interesting example was by Avraham Avinu. Why was he mitzdayer? Why was he in pain when there was nobody? If it's just the midah itself, that's where it starts. Midas HaChesed. No, there's no one to give chesed to, so there's no problem. Chesed is not required. Why was he mitzdayer? He was mitzdayer because invested in his Midas HaChesed is his whole being. It's not just a midah response. It's someone who needs. Chesed is as a midah, is a response to a matzah. If there's no matzah, there's no response. There's no midah aroused. But tainig is an essential state. Tainig is the eye, not a response to a matzah. So Avram was isha chesed be'etzem. Therefore, he was mitzdayer when there was no one to give chesed to. So that's an example of tainig that affects the midas. How tainig affects seichel is obvious that. Right, it's a person should learn only where he wants to, and that affects, expands his intellectual capacities. Then he went on lower, but then, by the way, there was very sharp words about Ishach Zori. That the Ishach Chesed is Ishach Chesed, not that he has Midas Chesed. That's his essential quality. That's where his timing is. So the opposite is the Ishach Zori. That's such a person that if there's no one that he can make miserable, then he's miserable. He only feels satisfied when he's making when there's an expression of cruelty to somebody else on some level. So that's in Lumazeh. And there's a sherish that the Mila, the Bnei Elikim, in the story of Iyov, they came in, they told Abishta, you think this Iyov is not what you think he is. Let's put him to the test. They were not, the Bnei Elikim, he described them as Mastinim and Makatrikim. They, Rosh Hashanah and Makatik accusers and seducers. They just couldn't stand it that he was a person successful and a wonderful person. It just bothered them. That's how God made them. And therefore they sought to undermine him. So that's an example in Midas, and likewise in Koyach HaMaaseh. What was the example of Koyach HaMaaseh and Tainug? A Gemara. Anybody remembers? It's number 34. Gemara Bava Metzia. Uchuset Mechuz Ilay Avda Cholshi. Anybody remembers the story here? The people, the population of Mechuzah, if they don't work, they get weak. So the halacha over there, Rabbi says that if you hired, he says like this, you hired laborers for a job and they finish it early. The question is, you hired them for the day to do the job. So can you give them further work? So he says you can give them work of lesser or equal, but not more. And if you can't find that kind of work, then you have to pay them as if they worked. So the Gemara says, well, pay them not as if they worked, pay them the rest of those hours as if they didn't work, like the minimum wage. So he says, the Gemara says, because it's talking about such people, the mechuzah, they don't work, they're weak. So not working is not a favor to them. So you've got to compensate that. There's the meishris, if someone is, there's the minimum wage. So you can't pay them the minimum wage because the koyach hamaisa, because the whole gishmak, the whole metzias is in labor. And if they're not working physically, they're not, they weaken. Hence, he has to compensate for that and pay them not just the minimum wage, but as if they worked. The minimum wage is for someone who stands in the field like a scarecrow. It's not work. There's no labor there. It's just to frighten away the birds. That's the minimum wage. You can't do that because for such people, this weakens them. So that's it illustrates in halacha. I don't know if this brings this anywhere else, but I'm believing in halacha that we should find this Gemara. Maybe it's more in other places. The India that the tiny effects of a koyach hamaaseh. So even there, so tiny effects, but this is all is pashtus tiny. This is all the ha'or of tiny that we're demonstrating here in the seichel, midas, and maaseh. But the tiny that comes up, midas haberur, that's etzema tiny. That's how we find that ha'oras are tiny, the reflection of tiny becomes bischalkus. Can't compare the Tainug in Seichel, in Chochmah, to the Tainug in Bina, and certainly the Tainug in Maaseh, because since it's a gilui, since it's a revelation, so it comes quantifiable to each level, according to its level. The higher faculties of the nefesh, the Tainug is greater. So the illustration for this is Lamaila, that there's the Tainug in the Olamas. So first of all, there is just the Olamas themselves before the Tainug. So there's three dargas. There's the Chayis and the Olamas, no Tainug. Then the Chayis and the Olamas mitzad ha'oras ha'Tainug of the Eibishter. And then there's the Chayis mitzad the Etzem ha'Tainug, which is listed throughout Veda. So the life force that creates per se, it's ishtalshalis per se, it's mashem mukhrach. That's what's required. Tainug is already an extra hashpa, and that the Piddush of the Tur and Beir in the Farshes Rabbis v'chesroinon al kol ma'asher brasa lachayis behem chesroinon, that which they lack, we praise Him for giving that which they lack, and that's the highest which is necessary for their existence. L'hachis behem, so that is already beyond chesar, it's beyond lack, and that is Tainug. So the chayus is the basic chayus is again bilei chesaron, filling the lap of that which they couldn't survive. That's what he gives that, and he also gives that's bakbola, that's limited, and it's the einig, which is, as we said before, tainuk, hashpa, hisrachvus, expansion beyond Hashem provides, beyond just that, beyond just that which is necessary to exist. And that's the union of Ashirus. But all of this is still a ha'ara. It's still a ha'ara, it's still a Ashirus that comes relative to each level. As you saw in the Nefesh Adam, the Tainugim Chachmas are the same as the Tainugim Bina. As you go down, the Tainug lessons gets weaker or diminished. But the Tainug, the whole is to bring out, but the Tainug, this is the Etzema Tainug. Right? So then explain the Lashonis and Pasach Eliyot. You want to look at it there, it's for the number 38. The end of Ois Gimel. There the Etzema Tainug is mentioned first. He says, let's look at it again. He waters the tree. Kamaya the Ashkili Lana, like water that waters the tree. Israbu Bahu Shakyu and expands from that water. The next pasuk says, repeats it, and says, the Ashkili Lana Bahunavir, he waters it with that fountain. Bahunavir, and that fountain is Chayim Lagufa, gives life to the body like the soul does. So this is the two levels. Chaim Lagufa, the second one is the lower one. Usually goes higher, but it's lower. Chaim Lagufa, that's Chayis. But in the Vashas of Shachas HaTainuk, that's more than Muchrach. That's the Ha'ara of Tainuk. That's still the Ha'ara. That which he says earlier, that Shakuli the Ilona, and he waters the tree. That is the Etzema Tainuk, which has no Akbalas of it. The Dikas Ve'iyu. Ve'iyu Shakuli Ilona, he. Because, just realizing now, the lower one is the Nevi'u, is the well, but the higher one is the Iyu. So the well is Chaim Lagufa, that's Ha'ara Tainuk. That comes from the well. But Iyu Shaki, he waters the ilana the tree, the Shtaushalus, that's Etzema Tainuk, and that comes as a result of a disability. But he added at the end that this is all Nimshach through the Kav in all of Shtaushalus. Even though the Kav, ostensibly, externally, ends at Atzilus, and Atzilus then kind of takes over the chain of command. That's Bechitzonius. But the Pnimius, all the way down the Shtalshul, the Kavan, the Pnimius is carried in a latent way, and that is the Nisava Kodesh Baruch Hu V'Dira B'Tachtonim. And when he does the Avodah, so then the Etzema Tainug is drawn into creation. Is that clear? Is Dalit? So is Dalit. So the Etzema Tainug is drawn where? In Malchus. So there's a paradox. The Etzema Tainug is in Malchus, is drawn to the final level. Yeah. And that paradox parallels creation itself. That creation itself, very famous Nekudah, which we talk about all the time, based on Tanya Geras HaKodesh, that the Savos HaGashmius, which is the lowest level of creation, that's a direct investure of Keich HaAtzmos. Right? Only the Eibishter can create, his words are quoted, only the Eibishter can create something of absolute nothing. Explained, because cannot create Yesh Ma'ayin. Cannot create something that is completely outside of its own Geder. The whole Geder of is not Yesh Ma'ayin. It comes from a Moy. So it can create something that will feel its source. Ilav Olul can produce a lot of Ilav Oluls, lower and lower and lower, but it's all going to trace back. The Olul is always going to feel that there's an Ilav. To create something that's completely sense of independence and that has no, it doesn't feel it comes from anywhere. You can't create that. It's all Geder, it's Gilui. That's what it is. It produces Gilui. But Atmos, the Eibishter, who is I that I am, can create a world that says I that I am. So that's the paradox. The Dafke Gashmius, The Yesh HaNivra is invested. The Yesh HaNivra is the Yesh HaAmiti. Just like that's in my Tainug, it's the same Nekuda, just different oisius, different levels, different models. It's all one Indian. That's in my Tainug is Dafkin Malchus.
I would say that it's just so far away from all that.
You feel less and less and less and less.
I think that it's less and less to the point that it's so far away from the model.
Oil can't produce choshech. You say complete darkness. Oil can't produce darkness. Oil produces a low level of oil. You're not saying a matzah of choshech legamer, not to feel anything. Oil is oil. It's what it is. It will produce that which it is. It can't produce that which it is not. Its whole get that is gilur. So it will produce that which has these properties, lower level, different manifestation. Oil can't produce choshech. Gosh, you can't make choshech. You eclipse it, finished. It's not the picture. You're not producing the choshech. It's not creating a choshech. When he's not there, the result is choshech. In the chanam, no giluim, choshech, and there Atmos creates. Kind of clear. So the reason is why the Etzem HaTanya is dafke in Balchos, because not tchilosim the seifon betchilosim. Beginning is wedged in the edge, beginning is wedged in the end, and the end in the beginning. And the beginning is expressed in Malchus more than in Chochmah. Even though Chochmah is very lofty, it's the level of Reishis. And even though in Chochmah the Tainik is greater than the levels below it, but that's all the Ha'orah. But the Etzem HaTainik is Dafke Malchus. What's the whole Maimer? What's the Nekuda of every Maimer? The Sava Kodesh Baruch, there's a ganz Chassidus. The Sava Kodesh Baruch, at least it did it with Achtoinim. So the Etzem HaTainik is in Malchus, and Avidas HaBirurim, and Dafke in our Aveda. Now comes a beautiful beer, a Inyan, at the end of second paragraph, page down. A stunning Maimer Azal. The Maimer Azal and Medish Rabbah, Bereshis Rabbah. Hashem created the world at the outset. He created light and dark. Says the Medrash, at that point, don't know which one he wants. The actions of Tzaddikim, the actions of Rishoyim. Later, it's the Pasuk says, "Vayara lekim esa'ir kitov." Oh, so we know that he wants Masem Shel Tzaddikim. What does this mean? It means mitzad the rotzen to create. We don't know what he wants. Everything is all insignificant equally. There's absolutely no values. There are no values to speak of. There are no values. The Gabba Atzmos, there are no values. So mitzad the rotzen to create. He wants to create. So what's it going to produce? No idea. Morality is not a given. Eibishtin reveals no. So what is that? That he says that's what I want. Not a question of one, more than one. That's what my tainig is. So there's the rotzen. He separates the levels here. Mitzad the level of rotzen, that Hashem can produce a will. Can be for anything. That will can be produced for anything. There's absolutely no limits, no boundaries, no values, no worse, no better, no higher, no lower. Even these language, worse, better, good, bad, they all come after the fact. Can produce anything, nothing. So there, everything's equal. But mitzad, the nis'ave, the tainug, you want stuff go. Ma'aseh shel tzaddikim. So therefore, the Nakud is the dafka mitzad the etzem ha'tainug. This causes the bitter between good and bad. We're going to just tap into the rotzen. Somebody take a vote. To tap into the rotzen Hashem, and not the Eibishter's articulated desire. The rotzen Hashem is a big level of holiness. Everything goes there. Everything is justified. I think I once told you this. Famous Gemara, the Chassidus brings it, the Galef on the Machtarte Rachmanakari. So the thief is on the threshold. He's calling on the Eibishter for success in his venture. So this brings us always as like, are you crazy? You believe in God, you pranked him, and you're stealing. So Chassidus says because Amun is makif. This is all to illustrate that if you don't be mamshech in the previous, there can be this dissidence, disconnect between behavior and one's emunah. Taka believes, but it doesn't filter into, you believe God says you can't steal. There's a disconnect between that and his seichel and his feelings. That's in pashtus. But on a deeper level, it's because of his emunah. Because of his emunah, not at the level of maybe just title. That is not. It's his emunah in the infinite God manifested in the Rotzen. Like Tevye said, God is a great God, can tolerate everything, and you can let this pass, and everything's the same anyway. And what difference does it make? Adarab exploits the emunah. How insignificant he is, how great God is. Does it make a big difference? Does it make a difference? That's because there's appreciation of the vastness and the infinitude of Hashem. That's connecting to the Ratzon Hashem. Any day Be'ezim Chofetz, my say, Shal Tzadikim, Shal Shoyim. So it's all the same. So let me get away with it. So Adrab, it's his emunah, which actually motivates his theft. What's he missing? He's missing connection to the Eibishter's time. You're right, but I've decided I want this and not that. So get to know me. Yeah? Okay, so this is not, then he says, this is not Bestivit to what it says elsewhere. That klippus come from the lack of Ratzin. The Shabbos HaKlippus is the lack of the Eibishter's Ratzin, which would imply that when you invoke the Ratzin, that's the period of the Klippa. And here we're saying it's Tainut. That it is, we mean previous Ratzin. We don't mean Chetzin, it means Tainut. And that's why the Lashon is, and the Medrash is, these ones Hano benefit, he benefits one, he benefits from, and these he doesn't benefit. It doesn't say these he wants, these he doesn't want. The Lashon, the Medrash, Behemshech to this, Behemshech to, I don't know what he wants, Tzadikim or Rishoyim, whose actions, these are Hano, a pleasure for him, and these are not. The Diak is Hano, not Rotz. Hano is Pnei B'Sarotz. We're following, yes. Continuing now, the next paragraph, and if you have the same ratio down the last paragraph.
So Rabbi, Tanug is Pnimius Aratzon?
Yeah.
Tanug is Pnimius Aratzon.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. The Nakud of Tanug again is expressive of the I am. This is me. And the Rotzen is already something else. He wants something else. And so the Eibishter's Rotzen, something else. Everything else for the Eibishter is all equally insignificant. Someone said the Darge of Rotzen, it's all equal. The paradox is that it's at the Darge of Tainut, where the Eibishter expresses his essential chira, his essential deepest choice. This is me where I want to be. That differentiating says this yes and this no. He goes on to explain now, just give the Nakud of what's coming is here, and this is what, that which is known, it's from Tanya, yes, HaKodesh, the Avodah Seburim comes from Bechinas Chachma Stima. B'chalal it says, he brings it even later, but this is all to explain. This is going to explain why the Shluchim, the whole Avodah Seburim, the Meragim have to be Anshi Moishe, because Moishe's in Yonah is Chachma. The Chachma is Berira. So I said, I'll repeat what I said a couple of shiurim ago, just to get some clarity here, refresh our memory. The Chachma is Berira, it's according to Zohar. Chachma brings, simple meaning, Chachma brings clarity. Simple illustration. Chachma means if you have the Nakuda, if you have the big picture, Chachma is the Nakuda. Nakuda of the big picture. And the Nakuda of the big picture brings clarity. What of all of the parts and their role, and they play in it. If you don't have the big picture, you're just lost in the parts themselves. Emotional. Oisius, there's letters in the table. The Oisius, one letter, another letter. The Kudas HaChochma is this all tied together. There's a word or a sentence, a paragraph. There's a central idea here. And they're all the letters that fall into place. So B'Chochma is Berira, when you have the Nekuda of something, and all of the manifestations have fall into place appropriately, and there's Birur of what belongs here, what belongs there, etc. That's the simple meaning of B'Chochma is Berira. But the Alter Rebbe says that the emes, it comes from Chochma Stima, not Tam Choch, the true Birur. Why? Because the true Birur of, again, my same Shal Tzadikim and my same and not my same Shal Shoyim, the end of the day is because that's the Eibish's timing. Because ultimately all is equally insignificant. The pshat is, I'm trying to reconcile the Chachma is Beriru, which is Stam Chachma, and then the insistence that it can't be Stam Chachma, although there is that role, as I just told you, it's Daka Chachma Stima, because Chachma is Beriru can make this clarification of, this is my same Shal Tzadikim, this is my same Shal Shoyim, but which one? What's valuable? What's valuable? Nekudas HaChachma, which is truly objective, can see the value, this one, the value in the other opinion, the value in neither of them. It brings clarity, but doesn't bring a moral judgment. It doesn't make anything right or wrong. So just clarify. But why good over bad? That's at the end of the day only because the Eibishter chose it. That's the Chachma Stima. Chachma Stima, which conveys the B'chidas Atzmos, the Misava HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's ultimately where the Birur can come. So there's an enlightenment that's Stam Chachma, very wise person. Very wise doesn't make a person a moral person. He can explain everything in clarity and point out differences and see the world in a cohesive way. It's all very nice, but it's not a question of a moral. So what do you do? Which one? Adrabah, Chachma is objective. The objective just tells you what is. Chachma Stima carries with it what is the atik. It's all these words here, but it's all to say that in Chachma, it has to be rooted. It can't be Stam Chachma. It's got to be rooted in Chachma Stima, which is the Eibishter's desire. I want this and not this. Is that kind of clear? That's what's coming in this Kabbalah here in this next section. Okay, we'll stop here. Tomorrow we will conclude the Maimer and begin the next one. Tomorrow, 8:15 this year. Okay, davening is 9 o'clock. I hope it works, everybody. Yes? Yossi, it works for you? You don't mind getting an extra 2 hours sleep?
I don't think so, but we'll
see. What? Oh, it's not Canada Day, but your wife is
davening's at 7. It'll be after davening.
What?
It'll be after davening. We'll see.
After davening. Okay.